There are whispers in the void, whispers of souls that never returned. They speak not of salvation, but of a fate far worse than death. On Terra, beneath the golden gaze of the Emperor, pilgrims march willingly toward a throne that consumes not their lives, but their very essence. And when the ritual begins, there is no escape, no mercy, only eternity in his service, an eternity more terrible than hell itself. In the grim darkness of the far future, there are whispers that drift through the cold void between stars, whispers that speak of a fate so terrible that even the denizens of the warp recoil in horror. These are not the screams of the damned burning in chaos's embrace, nor the wails of souls torn apart by demons. No, these whispers carry something far worse. The hollow echoes of those who have been consumed by the God-Emperor of mankind himself. Across 1,000,000 worlds, in the darkest corners of hive cities and the holiest of sanctuaries, pilgrims speak in hushed tones of the golden throne. They tell stories of the chosen ones, those blessed souls selected for the ultimate honor of sacrifice to the master of mankind. The faithful believe these souls ascend to eternal glory, their essence joining with the divine light of the Emperor. They believe wrong. The truth is a cancer that eats at the foundations of the Imperium itself. For in the deepest vaults of Terra, where even the high lords dare not tread, there exists knowledge that would shatter the faith of worlds. The Emperor's hunger is not divine mercy. It is an endless, ravenous void that devours not just life, but the very concept of existence itself. To be sacrificed to the Emperor is not to find peace in death. It is to discover that death was always the kinder option. These whispers carry across the galaxy on solar winds and astropathic currents, touching the minds of those sensitive enough to hear them. They speak of pilgrims who journey to Terra with songs of praise on their lips, only to learn that their God is not salvation. He is the ultimate predator, and they are merely prey, dressed in the finery of faith. The whispers tell of souls not ascending to glory, but descending into something infinitely more terrible than any hell ever conceived. Listen carefully to these whispers, for they carry the only warning the universe will ever give. They speak of Terra, that sacred world where 10 billion souls live and die each day in service to their God-Emperor. They speak of the Golden Throne, that magnificent prison where the most powerful psyker in human history slowly devours the essence of reality itself. And they speak of the chosen ones, those who will learn in their final moments that mercy died 10,000 years ago, and all that remains is an insatiable hunger wearing the mask of divinity. The whispers grow stronger now, carried on currents of psychic energy that pulse outward from holy Terra like the dying heartbeat of hope itself. They tell us that the Emperor's light is not warmth. It is the cold fire of consumption. His protection is not love. It is the possessiveness of a predator guarding its prey. And his salvation is not deliverance. It is the promise that your suffering will have no end, no release, no meaning beyond feeding an appetite that has already consumed the dreams of a species. In the cold mathematics of the Imperium, 1,000 psychers die each day to keep the astronomicon burning. But the whispers tell us this is merely the visible sacrifice, the acceptable loss that the Imperium can acknowledge. Below this, hidden in shadows deeper than the spaces between stars, lies the true scale of the Emperor's hunger. For every psyker fed to the Golden Throne, 10,000 more souls are consumed in ways that leave no trace, no record, no memory save for these whispers that somehow escape the gravitational pull of Terra's dark secret. The faithful across the galaxy pray to their God Emperor, begging for his protection, his guidance, his mercy. They do not realize that every prayer is answered, not with blessing, but with the terrible attention of something that ceased to be human so long ago that the very concept of humanity burns in its presence like paper in a furnace. The whispers tell us that the Emperor hears every prayer, feels every moment of faith, tastes every drop of devotion, and finds it all insufficient to slake a thirst that grows with each passing moment. These are the whispers that echo from the golden throne, carrying across the Imperium itself to touch the minds of those who still possess enough of their souls to hear them. They speak of Terra, and of what awaits those who journey there seeking the face of their God. They speak of the choice that is no choice, to serve as fuel for a dying star, or to feed the hunger of something that has forgotten what it means to die. The whispers grow louder now, urgent with the knowledge that time itself bends around Terra, that reality warps under the weight of the Emperor's presence. They tell us that the pilgrims are coming as they always come, drawn by faith to their doom. They tell us that the rituals are beginning as they never end, each sacrifice feeding a machine that has transcended both life and death to become something worse than either. And in the growing volume of these whispers, in their desperate urgency to be heard before they too are consumed, we begin to understand the true horror of the 41st millennium. It is not that there is only war, it is that there is only one true predator in the galaxy, and it wears the face of humanity's greatest hope. Terra looms before us now, that sacred world where nightmares are born and dreams go to die. Let the whispers guide us through its horrors, for they are the only light we have in a darkness that has already consumed everything we thought we knew about mercy, about salvation, about the very nature of existence itself. Terra, the throne world of the God Emperor, the beating heart of the Imperium of man, the holiest of holy worlds in a galaxy drowning in darkness. To speak its name is to invoke reverence in the hearts of trillions. To set foot upon its surface is the ultimate pilgrimage, the highest honor a faithful servant can achieve. To understand its true nature is to glimpse the event horizon of madness itself. From orbit, Terra appears as a golden jewel suspended in the void, its surface blazing with the light of 10 billion souls, living in perfect harmony with their divine master. The massive hive cities stretch toward the heavens, like prayers made manifest in stone and steel, their spires crowned with cathedrals so vast that entire worlds could worship within their shadows. The imperial palace itself defies comprehension, a structure so immense that it has its own weather patterns, its own gravitational fields, its own pocket dimensions where reality bends to accommodate the impossible architecture of faith made flesh. But to descend through Terra's atmosphere is to witness the first lie crumble away like ancient parchment. The golden light that seems so pure from space reveals itself as the reflected glow of 1,000,000 funeral pyres, burning day and night to consume the endless stream of bodies that Terra produces. The harmonious cities show their true faces, twisted warrens of suffering where human beings are processed like raw materials, their lives measured only by their utility to the great machine of imperial bureaucracy. The very air of Terra is thick with more than pollution and incense. It carries the psychic weight of 10,000 years of accumulated anguish, the compressed screams of countless billions who have lived and died in service to their God Emperor. To breathe Terra's air is to taste despair so concentrated that it has become a physical substance, coating the lungs with the residue of broken dreams and shattered hopes. In the lower levels of the hive cities, where the sun has not shone for millennia, Entire populations exist in a state of perpetual twilight. They are born, live, and die without ever seeing the sky, their entire existence devoted to producing the raw materials needed to feed the endless hunger of the imperial palace. These are not the chosen ones. They are merely the biomass, the organic machinery that keeps the great engine of Terra functioning. Their suffering is so commonplace that it has become invisible, a background radiation of misery that permeates every stone, every breath of recycled air, every drop of contaminated water. Yet even this ocean of mundane torment pales before the true horror that lies at Terra's heart. For the imperial palace is not merely a seat of government or a monument to human achievement. It is a feeding apparatus of cosmic proportions, a machine designed to process souls on an industrial scale. Its countless chambers and corridors form a digestive system that spans continents, each room serving a specific function in the great work of consumption that has continued unabated for 10 millennia. The pilgrims who journey to Terra arrive with hearts full of faith and eyes bright with devotion. They come from every corner of the galaxy, traveling for years or even decades to reach the throne world of their god-emperor. They bring with them the prayers of their homeworlds, the hopes of their families, the accumulated faith of entire generations who have dreamed of this moment. They do not know that their journey is not a pilgrimage, it is a delivery, and they are the cargo. The processing begins the moment they set foot on Terran soil. The mighty bureaucracy of the Adeptus Terra sorts them with mechanical efficiency, categorizing each pilgrim according to their psychic potential, their physical condition, their genetic markers, their spiritual purity. To the pilgrims, this appears to be a form of benediction, a holy examination that will determine their worthiness to approach the golden throne. The architecture of the imperial palace itself serves as part of this great sorting mechanism. Its corridors are designed to channel human movement like water through pipes, directing different categories of pilgrims toward their designated endpoints. The faithful follow gilded pathways lined with inspiring frescoes and uplifting hymns, never realizing that they are walking through the digestive tract of something that has transcended the need for conventional anatomy. Some pilgrims are selected for immediate processing. These are the fortunate ones, if fortune can be found in any corner of this hell. They are led to ceremonial chambers where their deaths are dressed in the pageantry of sacrifice, their final moments accompanied by choirs and incense and the gentle lies of priests who have long since forgotten the meaning of mercy. These souls experience only a brief moment of confusion before the end, a fleeting instant where they glimpse the true face of their God before consciousness is snuffed out forever. But the majority face a different fate entirely. They are led deeper into the palace, through corridors that seem to stretch beyond the bounds of normal space, past chambers that exist in defiance of Euclidean geometry. The further they descend, the more the pretense of divine glory falls away, replaced by something that resembles the interior of a vast organism more than any structure built by human hands. The walls pulse with a rhythm that matches no human heartbeat. The air grows thick with psychic pressure that makes thoughts sluggish and vision blurred. The pilgrims begin to understand that they are not approaching salvation. They are being digested, processed, broken down into their component essences to feed something that exists beyond the boundaries of human comprehension. The Golden Throne itself stands at the center of this vast feeding apparatus, a structure that defies description not because of its beauty, but because of its alien wrongness. It is not a chair or a throne in any conventional sense. It is an interface, a connection point between the material universe and something that exists in the spaces between reality and nightmare. The emperor sits upon it not as a ruler upon his seat of power, but as a component in a machine designed to process the fundamental forces of existence itself. From the throne, psychic tendrils extend throughout the palace, like the root system of some vast tree, each one designed to channel the essence of consumed souls back to the central nexus. The pilgrims who are led into the presence of their God see not the glorious Savior of humanity, but something that wears the shape of divinity while being utterly alien to every concept of godhood that humanity has ever conceived. The emperor's attention falls upon them like the weight of dying stars, and in that attention they discover the truth that the whispers have been trying to tell them. They are not here to be blessed. They are here to be consumed. Their faith, their hope, their love, their fear, their very concept of individual existence, all of it is fuel for something that has moved beyond the need for such distinctions as good and evil, mercy and cruelty, salvation and damnation. Terra reveals itself as not just a world, but as a vast mouth preparing to swallow. The imperial palace is not a seat of government, but a digestive system. The golden throne is not a symbol of power, but a feeding apparatus. And the emperor himself is not a god or a man, but something that has transcended both categories to become the ultimate predator, one that feeds not on flesh or blood, but on the very concept of hope itself. The pilgrims' screams echo through corridors that were designed to amplify and channel their anguish, adding their voices to the eternal choir of the consumed. Their terror becomes part of Terra's atmosphere. Their despair seeps into the planet's crust. Their final realization that they have been deceived becomes yet another note in the symphony of suffering that has been playing without pause for 10,000 years. This is Terra in its true form. Not the throne world of a benevolent god-emperor, but the feeding ground of something that wears the mask of divinity while being utterly alien to every human concept of the divine. It is a world where mercy is not absent, but actively consumed, where hope is not lost, but deliberately harvested, where faith is not rewarded, but used as seasoning for the greatest feast of souls ever conceived. They come to Terra as pilgrims, but they arrive as cattle marked for slaughter. Across the galaxy, on 10,000 worlds, the selection process begins in ways both subtle and overt. Sometimes it is presented as an honor, the ecclesiarchy's representatives arriving with great ceremony to announce that certain citizens have been chosen for the ultimate blessing. Sometimes it is dressed as necessity. Psychers must be gathered, they say, to fuel the emperor's great works. And sometimes it is simply taken. Entire populations vanishing in the night, their absence explained away by bureaucratic necessities too complex for common minds to comprehend. The chosen ones rarely understand their true fate until it is far too late to matter. They are selected according to criteria that would drive sane minds to madness if fully understood. Algorithms that measure not just psychic potential or genetic purity, but the precise flavor of hope that each soul carries, the specific quality of faith that will provide the richest nourishment for their God-Emperor's endless hunger. Mira Santos was selected on her 25th birthday, chosen from among the shrine keepers of Cadia's refugee camps. The ecclesiarch who delivered the news spoke of divine favor, of how her pure faith had drawn the emperor's attention across the vast gulf of space. She wept with joy as the golden seal was pressed into her palm, the mark that would grant her passage aboard the black ships bound for Terra. Her family celebrated for days, believing their daughter had been blessed beyond all measure. She did not know that her selection was based on a psychic resonance frequency that occurred in fewer than 1 in 10 million human souls, a frequency that, when properly harvested, could power the Astronomicon for exactly 17 minutes and 43 seconds. Her faith was irrelevant. Her purity was meaningless. She had been chosen because her terror, when it finally came, would taste of a specific combination of betrayal and broken trust that the Emperor found particularly sustaining. The journey to Terra aboard the Black Ships is itself a form of preparation, though the pilgrims do not recognize it as such. They are told it is a time for purification, for meditation, for preparing their souls to stand in the presence of the divine. The reality is far more pragmatic. The voyage serves to age their faith like wine, allowing hope to ferment into something richer and more complex before the final harvest. The ships themselves are marvels of twisted engineering, their holds designed to maximize both the physical and psychological processing of human cargo. The pilgrims are housed in chambers that gradually shift in temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure, according to patterns derived from decades of experimentation. The walls display rotating images of imperial glory and theological instruction, but embedded within these displays are subliminal triggers designed to heighten emotional responsiveness and break down psychological barriers. During the journey, the pilgrims form bonds with one another, friendships forged in shared anticipation of divine communion. They pray together, share stories of their home worlds, comfort each other through moments of doubt or homesickness. They do not realize that these connections are being cataloged and measured, that the strength of their emotional attachments is being calculated for maximum traumatic impact when they are eventually severed. Brother Joachim, a missionary from the shrine world of Ophelia 7, became Mira's closest friend during the journey. He had been selected for his extraordinary ability to inspire faith in others, a gift that made his own eventual despair particularly valuable. The two spent countless hours discussing theological mysteries, debating the nature of the Emperor's love, sharing dreams of the glorious moment when they would finally stand before the Golden Throne. Their friendship was noted by the ship's monitoring systems, tagged and filed in databases that tracked every emotional connection among the pilgrims. When the time came for processing, they would be separated and allowed to hear each other's screams echoing through the palace corridors, a symphony of betrayed trust that would add complex harmonies to the final harvest of their souls. The indoctrination begins subtly during the voyage, woven into the daily routines of prayer and meditation. The pilgrims are taught new hymns, songs that they believe honor the Emperor, but which actually serve to attune their psychic emanations to frequencies that can be more easily absorbed. They participate in rituals that they think are expressions of devotion, but which are actually conditioning exercises, training their minds to enter specific states of consciousness on command. Sleep becomes a weapon turned against them. The chambers aboard the Black Ships are equipped with devices that manipulate dream states, implanting scenarios that gradually erode the pilgrim's sense of individual identity while strengthening their emotional attachment to the concept of divine service. Night after night, their subconscious minds are reprogrammed, their personalities sculpted like clay in the hands of an artist who has had 10,000 years to perfect his craft. Marcus Vell, a former Imperial Guard sergeant who had been selected for his unwavering loyalty, began experiencing dreams where he watched his old regiment being slaughtered while he stood paralyzed, unable to help. Each night the dreams grew more vivid, more detailed, more emotionally devastating. He would wake screaming, only to be comforted by his fellow pilgrims who were experiencing their own tailored nightmares. The communal suffering created bonds of shared trauma that would make their eventual betrayal all the more exquisite. The pilgrims are told that these dreams are tests of faith, trials sent by the emperor to purify their souls before they can stand in his presence. They embrace their suffering gladly, believing it brings them closer to their God. They do not understand that they are being tenderized, their psychological defenses systematically dismantled to ensure maximum vulnerability when the final moment arrives. As the black ships approach Terra, the pilgrims are gathered for a final ceremony of preparation. They are dressed in simple white robes, garments that they believe symbolize purity, but which are actually designed for easy removal and disposal. They are anointed with oils that they think are blessed, but which contain psychoactive compounds that heighten emotional sensitivity and lower resistance to psychic intrusion. The ceremony culminates in a communion ritual where each pilgrim drinks from a chalice they believe contains blessed wine. The liquid burns as it goes down, leaving a taste of copper and ozone on their tongues. They are told, "This is the Emperor's fire, purifying their flesh in preparation for divine contact." In truth, it is a cocktail of drugs and psychically active compounds designed to break down the barriers between their conscious and unconscious minds, making their souls more accessible to the harvesting process. The first glimpse of Terra through the ship's viewing ports fills the pilgrims with overwhelming joy. They weep at the sight of the throne world, their hearts soaring at the thought that their long journey is finally at an end. They do not see the massive processing facilities that ring the planet like hungry mouths, or the streams of transport ships carrying away the ashes of those who came before them. They see only the golden light of the imperial palace, and their faith burns brighter than it ever has before. The landing process is choreographed with military precision. The pilgrims are organized into groups based on their processing categories. Though this sorting is disguised as ceremonial formations, honoring different aspects of the emperor's divine nature. Those marked for immediate consumption are placed in the formations of blessed martyrs. Those destined for more complex harvesting are designated as chosen witnesses. Those whose suffering will be prolonged for maximum yield are honored as sacred vessels. Mira found herself in the formation of sacred vessels, standing beside Brother Joachim and Marcus Vell. They held hands as the ship's ramps lowered, revealing the golden spires of Terra rising toward the stars. Their joy was so pure, so perfect, that the psychic monitoring equipment aboard the ship registered readings that would be studied for decades by the techno-adepts responsible for optimizing the harvesting process. They walked down the ramp, singing hymns of praise, their voices joining with those of 10,000 other pilgrims arriving simultaneously at processing stations around the globe. They believed they were ascending to paradise. They were actually descending into the digestive system of something that had transcended both paradise and hell to become something infinitely worse than either. The processing stations that receive the black ships are marvels of efficiency and deception. To the pilgrims, they appear as magnificent cathedrals filled with soaring architecture and inspiring artwork. The reality is that they are sorting facilities designed to channel human beings like grain through a mill. Every surface is embedded with sensors that measure psychic potential, emotional state, genetic markers, and dozens of other variables that determine each pilgrim's ultimate fate. The pilgrims are welcomed by figures they believe to be priests and angels, beings dressed in golden robes whose faces are hidden behind masks of beatific serenity. These are not holy men, but technicians, specialists in the art of human processing who have spent decades perfecting the techniques needed to extract maximum value from each soul that passes through their hands. Brother Joachim was the first to sense that something was wrong. His enhanced spiritual sensitivity, the very gift that had marked him for selection, began to detect the underlying wrongness that permeated the processing station. The joy that had filled his heart during the landing began to curdle into unease, then into fear, then into the first stirrings of the terror that would make his eventual consumption so satisfying. He tried to voice his concerns to Mira, but found that his tongue had grown thick and unresponsive. The chemicals they had consumed during the communion ritual were beginning to take effect, making coherent thought increasingly difficult. He could only watch in growing horror as his fellow pilgrims were led away in small groups, their faces blank with induced euphoria, their minds no longer capable of recognizing the danger they were in. The separation of the pilgrims is accomplished with practiced ease. Bonds of friendship and family are severed with surgical precision, each person channeled toward their designated processing area according to the categories established during the journey. The halls echo with confused calls as people search for companions who have already been led away, but the acoustics of the station are designed to muffle and redirect sound, creating an audio maze that prevents the formation of any coherent resistance. Mira reached out for Brother Joachim's hand as they were separated, her fingers brushing his for just a moment before the flow of bodies carried them in different directions. She saw the terror in his eyes, a terror that cut through the chemical haze, clouding her mind, and allowed her a moment of crystal-clear understanding. They had not come to Terra to be blessed. They had come to be consumed. But even this realization came too late to matter. The great machine of imperial processing had already claimed them, and there was no power in the galaxy that could alter their fate now. They were pilgrims no more. They were raw materials in the greatest feast the universe had ever seen, and their god emperor was hungry. The rituals that take place within the deepest chambers of the imperial palace are not ceremonies in any conventional sense. They are industrial processes dressed in the pageantry of faith, manufacturing procedures designed to extract every possible calorie of spiritual energy from the human souls fed into them. To witness these rituals is to understand that the line between religion and consumption has been erased completely, replaced by something that serves both functions with terrifying efficiency. The chamber of final communion extends deeper into Terra's crust than the roots of mountains, its walls carved from living rock that has been soaked in 10,000 years of accumulated anguish. The chamber's architecture defies rational comprehension, with corridors that seem to curve back upon themselves and spaces that appear larger from the inside than the outside. This is not accidental. The geometry itself has been designed to disorient and trap souls, preventing any possibility of escape once the harvest begins. At the chamber's heart stands the altar of consumption, a structure that resembles a fusion of machinery and organism. Its surface pulses with a rhythm that matches the beating of the Golden Throne's psychic heart, connected to that ultimate feeding apparatus by conduits that exist partially in real space and partially in the warp. The altar's surface is covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly, not because they are blasphemous, but because they represent concepts that human minds were never meant to process. The pilgrims are led into the chamber in groups of exactly 100, a number chosen not for its symbolic significance, but for its optimization of the harvesting process. Research conducted over millennia has determined that this specific quantity of souls creates resonance patterns that maximize the energy yield while minimizing the risk of psychic backlash that might damage the collection apparatus. Mira found herself in the 93rd position as her group was arranged in concentric circles around the altar. The chemical compounds she had ingested were now working at full efficiency, flooding her system with a cocktail designed to heighten every sensation while simultaneously preventing her from taking any meaningful action to protect herself. She could feel everything with perfect clarity, the cold stone beneath her feet, the oppressive weight of psychic energy pressing down from above, the terror radiating from the pilgrims around her, but her body refused to obey her desperate commands to run. The officiants who oversee these rituals are not priests in any traditional sense, though they wear the trappings of religious authority. They are technicians of the soul, specialists who have spent centuries learning to manipulate the fundamental forces of human consciousness. Their faces are hidden behind masks that shift and change according to patterns derived from the observer's own psychological profiles. Each pilgrim sees what their mind most expects to see in a figure of religious authority, making resistance psychologically impossible. The ritual begins with what appears to be a traditional imperial hymn, but the words are carefully chosen to create specific brainwave patterns in the listeners. The melody itself contains subsonic frequencies that resonate with the human nervous system, gradually synchronizing the pilgrims' biological rhythms with the pulsing of the altar beneath them. Within minutes, their heartbeats, their breathing, even their neural activity begins to match the predetermined patterns that will make their eventual extraction as efficient as possible. Brother Joachim's voice joined the hymn automatically, his vocal cords moving without conscious direction as the ritual's influence took hold. He tried to resist, tried to break free from the pattern that was being imposed upon his mind, but the conditioning he had received during the journey to Terra had been too thorough. His faith, once his greatest strength, had become the weapon being used against him, turned into a conduit that channeled his resistance back into the feeding system. The first phase of the ritual involves the gradual stripping away of individual identity. The pilgrims are led through a series of responses that seem like standard imperial litanies, but which actually serve to disconnect them from their personal histories, their relationships, their concept of self as distinct from the collective. With each recited line, another piece of their personality is peeled away and fed into the altar's hungry maw. "I am nothing before the Emperor's glory," they chant in unison, and with each repetition, their sense of personal worth is literally consumed by the apparatus surrounding them. "My life has meaning only in service to His will," they continue, and their individual dreams, hopes, and ambitions are stripped away and processed into psychic energy. "I surrender my flesh to His purpose," they conclude, and their bodies begin to cease belonging to them, becoming merely vehicles for the souls that are about to be harvested. The officiants move among the pilgrims with instruments that appear to be censers and ritual implements, but which are actually precision tools designed for spiritual vivisection. Each device is attuned to specific frequencies of human consciousness, allowing the operators to dissect souls with the same precision a surgeon might use to remove an organ. Marcus Vell felt the first incision as a burning sensation that seemed to originate from somewhere deeper than his physical body. The pain was unlike anything he had experienced, not the simple agony of damaged flesh, but the fundamental wrongness of having his essence carved away piece by piece. He tried to scream, but found that his voice had already been harvested, consumed by the altar before he could use it to express his suffering. The ritual's pace gradually accelerates as more and more of the pilgrim's spiritual substance is extracted and fed into the collection system. The chamber fills with a light that is not quite light, a radiance that exists primarily in spectrums that human eyes were never meant to perceive. This glow emanates from the altar as it processes the harvested souls, breaking them down into their component essences and channeling them toward the golden throne through conduits that span both physical space and psychic dimensions. The pilgrims begin to change as the ritual progresses, their forms becoming less solid, less defined. They are not dying in any conventional sense. Death would be a mercy compared to what is happening to them. Instead, they are being disassembled, their consciousness scattered across multiple levels of reality while remaining somehow aware of every moment of the process. Mira watched in horror as Brother Joachim began to fade, his form becoming translucent as his essence was drained away. She could see the terror in his eyes, even as his face became increasingly difficult to focus on, his identity bleeding away into the psychic machinery that surrounded them. She reached out to him, trying to offer some comfort in their final moments, but her hand passed through his form like mist. The altar's hunger grows, more intense as it feeds, its surface beginning to glow with accumulated soul energy. The symbols carved into its surface shift and writhe, forming new patterns that correspond to the specific spiritual signatures of the souls being consumed. Each pilgrim's unique essence leaves its mark on the apparatus, adding their individual flavor to the great feast that has been ongoing for 10 millennia. The officiants work with increasing urgency as the ritual reaches its climax, their instruments moving faster as they extract the final remnants of consciousness from the pilgrims. The air itself begins to thicken with psychic energy, creating a pressure that would crush normal human minds, but which the altar absorbs greedily, converting emotional and spiritual agony into the raw power needed to fuel the Emperor's continued existence. In the final moments of the ritual, as the last fragments of their identities are torn away, the pilgrims experience a moment of perfect clarity. They see through the lies that brought them to Terra, understand the true nature of their God-Emperor, comprehend the full scope of the deception that has consumed their entire species. This realization is not accidental. The terror and betrayal that comes with this understanding is the richest part of the harvest, the flavor that makes all the careful preparation worthwhile. The knowledge burns through their dissolving minds like acid. They are not martyrs or saints or blessed servants. They are cattle, livestock raised for slaughter in the greatest feeding operation ever conceived. Their faith was not devotion, but seasoning. Their journey to Terra was not a pilgrimage, but a delivery. Their God-Emperor is not divine, but ravenous, not merciful, but eternally hungry, not their savior, but their predator. And then, as this terrible understanding reaches its peak, the final phase of the ritual begins. The altar's surface opens like a mouth, revealing depths that extend beyond the physical boundaries of the chamber. The pilgrims' souls, now fully extracted and processed, are drawn into this abyss, not to find peace in death, but to discover that their torment is only beginning. The chamber of final communion falls silent as the ritual concludes, the altar's hunger temporarily satisfied. The officiants begin to prepare for the next group of pilgrims, already being led through the palace's corridors toward their appointment with consumption. The great machine of imperial processing never stops, never rests, never shows mercy. But in the depths of the altar, in spaces that exist beyond normal reality, the consumed souls continue to experience their fate. They have learned the ultimate truth about their universe, that hope is not just absent, but actively consumed, that faith is not just unrewarded, but used as fuel, that mercy is not just denied, but has been systematically devoured by the very entity they trusted to provide it. The ritual is complete, but the suffering has only just begun. Death, as humanity has understood it for millions of years, is the cessation of consciousness, the end of experience, the final boundary beyond which the self cannot pass. It is the ultimate escape, the one door that no tyrant can keep closed, the last mercy that even the cruelest universe must eventually provide. But in the deepest foundations of the imperial palace, where reality itself bends to accommodate the emperor's needs, death has been murdered, not metaphorically, but literally killed and fed to the same hungry void that consumes everything else. The souls that are processed through the rituals of the emperor do not find rest in oblivion. Instead, they discover that their consciousness has been transformed into something that can experience suffering without the relief of madness, feel pain without the mercy of shock, understand betrayal without the comfort of denial. They exist in a state that is simultaneously more and less than life, aware of their condition with perfect clarity, but stripped of any ability to change or escape it. In the spaces between real space and the warp, where the Golden Throne's influence creates pockets of existence that follow no natural laws, the consumed souls are stored like vintage wine aging in a cosmic cellar. Their suffering is not random or chaotic, but carefully cultivated, maintained at optimal levels to ensure maximum energy production over extended periods. Each soul exists in its own perfectly tailored hell, designed according to algorithms that have analyzed their deepest fears, their strongest attachments, their most fundamental beliefs about the nature of existence. Mira's consciousness found itself suspended in a void that resembled the shrine where she had once tended the Emperor's altar on Cadia. But this was not the warm, comforting space of her memories. It was a twisted reflection where every symbol of faith had been perverted into an instrument of torment. The Aquila above the altar writhed like a living thing, its wings dripping with the blood of innocence. The prayer book she had once read with devotion now contained only descriptions of her own failing faith, her moments of doubt, her secret fears that she had never been worthy of the Emperor's love. She was forced to tend this corrupt shrine for subjective centuries, performing rituals that she knew were meaningless, while being fully aware that her devotion was feeding something that cared nothing for her faith or her suffering. Every prayer she spoke aloud was a lie. Every gesture of reverence was a mockery. Every moment of service was a betrayal of everything she had once believed. Yet, she could not stop, could not refuse, could not even close her eyes to shut out the horror of what she had become. Brother Joachim's torment took a different form, tailored to his particular psychological profile. He found himself preaching to congregations of the faithful, delivering sermons about the Emperor's love and mercy, while being fully aware that every word he spoke was drawing his listeners closer to their own consumption. He watched generation after generation of believers hang on his every word, their faces shining with faith, their hearts full of hope, their souls already marked for the harvest he was helping to orchestrate. The worst part was not the knowledge of what he was doing. It was the fact that part of him, the part that had genuinely believed in the Emperor's divinity, continued to feel joy at their devotion. His love for his God had not been destroyed by his consumption. It had been perverted, transformed into a weapon that made his own complicity in their damnation all the more exquisite. He was forced to feel genuine religious ecstasy at the sight of faith he knew would lead to nothing but suffering, to experience true spiritual rapture while fully understanding its ultimate meaninglessness. Marcus Vell's hell was the simplest and perhaps the most devastating. He was trapped in an endless reenactment of his final battle as an Imperial guardsman, forced to watch his regiment die over and over again while being unable to help them. But with each repetition, his knowledge grew more complete. He understood that their deaths had been meaningless, that their sacrifice had served only to feed the machinery of an empire that cared nothing for their valor or their loyalty. He saw through the lies that had motivated him to fight, recognized the propaganda that had shaped his beliefs, comprehended the full scope of the deception that had consumed his entire life. Yet despite this knowledge, he continued to feel the same patriotic fervor, the same love for his fallen comrades, the same pride in service to the emperor that had defined his existence. His emotional responses had not been dampened by understanding. They had been preserved in perfect clarity, making every moment of realization a fresh betrayal, every repetition of the battle a new experience of loss and futility. The consumed souls are not isolated in their torment. They are connected to each other through the psychic network that channels their suffering to the Golden Throne. They can sense each other's pain, feel each other's despair, share in the collective realization that they are all part of the same vast feeding apparatus. This connection multiplies their agony exponentially, as each soul's suffering resonates through the network and amplifies the torment of all the others. They are also aware of the broader scope of their situation. They can sense the millions of other souls being processed through the palace's rituals, feel the constant flow of new arrivals being prepared for consumption, understand that their fate is not unique, but part of an industrial process that has been running continuously for 10,000 years. The knowledge that their suffering is not even special, not even noteworthy in the grand scheme of the emperor's hunger, adds another layer of existential horror to their condition. Time itself functions differently in these spaces of concentrated torment. Subjective experience can stretch for millennia, while only moments pass in real space, or compress centuries of suffering into instants of pure, distilled agony. The consumed souls experience every possible permutation of temporal torture, sometimes crawling through eons of boredom and despair, sometimes blasted with compressed eternities of concentrated pain, sometimes trapped in recursive loops where the same moment of realization or betrayal plays out infinitely without ever losing its impact. The Golden Throne draws sustenance from this reservoir of processed suffering, channeling the soul's agony through psychic conduits that exist partially in the warp and partially in dimensions that have no names in human language. The Emperor's continued existence depends not just on the psychic energy of the consumed souls, but on the specific quality of their torment, their betrayed faith, their corrupted love, their perverted hope transformed into an exquisite sauce that flavors the raw psychic power being fed to Terra's master. But perhaps the most horrible aspect of this existence is the knowledge that it serves a purpose. The consumed souls can sense how their suffering powers the Astronomicon, feel their anguish being converted into the psychic beacon that guides humanity's ships through the warp. They understand that their torment is not meaningless. It is the foundation upon which the entire Imperium rests, the fuel that keeps human civilization functioning across the galaxy. This knowledge creates a paradox that drives many of the consumed souls to the very brink of something that might be called madness, if madness were still possible in their state. They want the suffering to end, want the Emperor to release them, want the entire system to collapse and free them from their torment. But they also understand that their pain is all that stands between humanity and extinction, that their sacrifice, however unwilling, is genuinely protecting trillions of innocent lives across the galaxy. Some souls find a twisted form of comfort in this knowledge, convincing themselves that their suffering has meaning, that their torment serves a noble purpose. These souls often experience the deepest despair when they realize that this justification is itself part of the torture, designed to make their anguish more complex and therefore more nourishing for their consumer. Others reject this justification entirely, raging against the system that has trapped them and cursing the emperor who has consumed them. But their anger, too, becomes food for the machine, their rebellion processed into energy that powers the very system they hate. There is no position they can take, no attitude they can adopt, no emotional state they can achieve that does not somehow serve the purpose for which they were consumed. In the deepest levels of this psychic hell, some souls encounter others who have been trapped for far longer, ancient consciousnesses that were consumed during the Emperor's early experiments with soul harvesting, prisoners who have existed in this state since before the Imperium was even founded. These elder souls serve as warnings and examples, their sanity long since scoured away by millennia of perfectly calibrated torture, their identities reduced to concentrated essences of pure suffering. Yet even these ancient souls retain enough awareness to recognize the newcomers, to welcome them to their shared damnation with a mixture of pity and relief. Pity for what the new arrivals are about to experience, relief that they will no longer be alone in their torment. The recognition in their hollow voices is perhaps the most chilling sound in the universe, the greeting of one damned soul to another, the acknowledgement that they are all part of the same impossible feast, the same endless meal that their god emperor has been savoring for 10,000 years. And still, the harvesting continues. Still, the black ships arrive at Terra carrying their cargo of faithful souls. Still, the rituals process new victims through the machinery of consumption. The reservoir of tormented consciousness grows larger with each passing day. The symphony of suffering becomes more complex. The feast becomes more elaborate. The consumed souls can sense it all. Every new arrival, every fresh betrayal, every moment of realization as another group of pilgrims discovers the truth about their fate. They feel each new addition to their number like a physical weight. Another voice, joining the eternal choir of the damned. Another consciousness trapped in the web of torment that powers humanity's survival. This is what lies beyond death for those who are sacrificed to the Emperor. Not peace, not oblivion, not even the honest suffering of traditional damnation, but something infinitely worse. The knowledge that they have been transformed into fuel for a machine that will never stop running, that their agony will never end, that their faith has been perverted into the very power source that enables the deception of future generations. They exist now as warnings that will never be heard, as screams that will never be acknowledged, as proof of a truth that humanity cannot afford to recognize. They are the hidden foundation upon which the Imperium stands, the secret ingredient in the recipe for human survival, the unwilling martyrs whose sacrifice makes possible the continued existence of a species that will never know their names or honor their memory. In the deepest hell imaginable, they serve a purpose they never chose, fuel a system they have come to hate, and power the survival of a civilization that would collapse without their suffering. They are the Emperor's greatest feast and his most terrible secret, the souls who learned too late that mercy died 10,000 years ago, and all that remains is hunger, wearing the mask of divinity. In the vast machinery of the imperial palace, where every stone has been soaked in the blood of pilgrims, and every breath of air carries the psychic residue of 10,000 years of sacrifice, there exist those who must witness the truth of what transpires in the deepest chambers. These are not the consumed, not the faithful who journey to Terra seeking blessing, but the servants, the functionaries, the guardians, who know the price of the Emperor's continued existence and must live with that knowledge burning in their minds like acid. High Chaplain Mordian Keth had served in the palace for 3 centuries, rising through the ranks of the ecclesiarchy until he achieved the rank that granted him access to the chamber of final communion. His faith had once burned with the pure fire of absolute devotion, but that flame had long since been transformed into something else. A cold knowledge that ate at his soul like cancer while providing him with the certainty he needed to continue his duties. He stood in the observation gallery overlooking the 93rd ritual of the day, watching as another group of pilgrims was processed through the machinery of consumption. His enhanced eyes, modified with augmetic implants that allowed him to perceive psychic phenomena, tracked the flow of soul energy as it was extracted from the faithful and channeled toward the golden throne. The sight should have filled him with reverence for the emperor's power. Instead, it filled him with the familiar nausea that had become his constant companion. Below him, the pilgrims chanted their responses with voices full of hope and faith. Their joy was so pure, so perfect, that it created visible ripples in the psychic atmosphere of the chamber. Keth could see these ripples through his augmetic sensors, could watch as they were immediately absorbed by the harvesting apparatus and converted into usable energy. The sight reminded him of his own arrival at Terra centuries ago, when he too had believed that he was participating in something holy rather than something hungry. Beside him stood Interrogator Vex of the Ordo Hereticus, her power armor's sensors, recording every detail of the ritual for later analysis and optimization. She had been assigned to monitor the efficiency of the harvesting process, to identify ways to extract even more energy from each soul that passed through the system. Her reports had led to improvements in the conditioning protocols, refinements in the chemical compounds used to prepare the pilgrims, adjustments to the ritual procedures that increased yield by fractions of a percent that translated to billions of additional souls consumed over the course of decades. "The resonance patterns are within acceptable parameters," she reported, her voice flat and emotionless through her helmet's Vox grill. "Group cohesion is at 97%. Individual resistance is minimal. The new preparation protocols are showing a 12% improvement in extraction efficiency over the previous methodology." Keth nodded, making the appropriate notations in his data slate. The numbers were important. They determined how many souls would be needed to maintain the Astronomicon for another day, how many black ships would need to be dispatched to gather the next harvest, how many worlds would need to sacrifice their faithful to keep the emperor fed. The mathematics of damnation had become his specialty, the calculus of consumption his primary responsibility. In the chamber below, the ritual was reaching its climax. The pilgrims' forms were beginning to fade as their essence was extracted, their consciousness being drawn into the altar's hungry maw. Keth could see the exact moment when realization dawned in their eyes. The instant when they understood that they had not come to Terra to be blessed, but to be consumed. That moment of perfect betrayal always produced the richest psychic energy, the most flavorful addition to the Emperor's feast. Brother Joachim's face, visible through the chamber's viewing ports, showed the familiar progression of emotions that Keth had witnessed thousands of times before. Joy transforming into confusion, confusion deepening into fear, fear blossoming into terror, terror evolving into despair, and finally despair crystallizing into the pure distilled anguish that the harvesting apparatus craved above all else. Subject designation: J7741 is showing optimal trauma response, Vex noted, her sensors locked onto the missionary's dissolving form. Recommend flagging his psychological profile for replication in future batches. His specific combination of faith intensity and betrayal sensitivity produces exceptional energy yields. Keth forced himself to watch as Brother Joachim was consumed, his consciousness torn apart and fed into the psychic machinery that surrounded them. The chaplain had learned, over his centuries of service, to compartmentalize his emotional responses to these sights. The alternative was madness, or worse, the kind of crisis of faith that would mark him for processing through the very rituals he now oversaw. The ritual concluded with its usual efficiency, the altar's surface closing over the processed souls like a mouth swallowing a particularly satisfying meal. The officiants began preparing for the next group, their movements practiced and precise after decades of repetition. In 6 hours, another 100 pilgrims would stand in the same positions, chant the same responses, experience the same moment of terrible realization before being consumed by the same hungry apparatus. Captain Thaddeus Corin, commander of the Adeptus Custodes unit, assigned to guard the palace's deepest chambers, watched the ritual from his position near the chamber's primary entrance. His transhuman physiology and enhanced mental conditioning allowed him to witness these scenes without the psychological damage that would cripple normal humans, but even his superhuman constitution had its limits. Over the centuries of his service, he had developed a facial tic that manifested whenever he observed the harvesting rituals. A slight tremor at the corner of his left eye that betrayed the strain of maintaining his sanity in the face of such systematic horror. Corin's duty was not just to guard the chambers, but to ensure that no unauthorized personnel witnessed what transpired within them. The Imperium's survival depended not just on the Emperor's continued existence, but on the continued faith of humanity in his benevolence. If the truth of the harvesting rituals were to become known, if the citizens of the Imperium were to understand that their God-Emperor was not a protector, but a predator, the resulting collapse of faith would doom the species to extinction more surely than any alien invasion or chaos incursion. The captain had personally executed 47 individuals over the past century, guards, servants, maintenance workers, and functionaries who had seen too much or asked too many questions. Each execution was carried out with surgical precision, the victim's death arranged to appear accidental or attributed to causes that would not provoke investigation. The cover-ups had become routine, another administrative task, in the vast bureaucracy of concealment that surrounded the palace's deepest secrets. Tech Adept Zephyr 9 monitored the ritual from his position at the primary control station, his mechadendrites interfacing directly with the harvesting apparatus to ensure optimal energy transfer. His largely artificial consciousness was better suited to processing the horror of what he witnessed than the purely biological minds of his colleagues. But even his cybernetic mental architecture showed signs of stress when exposed to the systematic consumption of souls on an industrial scale. The Tech Adept's data logs contained detailed analyses of each ritual, measurements of energy extraction rates, efficiency reports that tracked the performance of the harvesting apparatus down to decimal points that represented thousands of consumed souls. His modifications allowed him to perceive the flow of psychic energy as it was channeled from the altar to the golden throne, to see the converted anguish as it powered the Astronomicon and maintained the psychic barriers that protected Terra from demonic incursion. But Zephyr 9's enhanced perception came with a terrible cost. He was also aware of the consumed souls themselves, could sense their continued existence in the reservoir of torment that fed the Emperor's hunger. His connection to the palace's data networks allowed him glimpses into that psychic hell, fragments of consciousness that leaked through the system's barriers and contaminated his own thought processes with their anguish. The tech adept had developed safeguards to protect his sanity, memory partition protocols that compartmentalized the most disturbing data, emotional dampening algorithms that reduced his capacity for empathy, cognitive firewalls that prevented him from dwelling too long on the implications of what he facilitated. But these protections were imperfect, and he had begun to experience what his diagnostics classified as ethical cascade failures, moments when the full weight of his complicity in the harvesting process broke through his mental defenses and threatened to trigger a complete psychological breakdown. Sister Superior Agatha Vorn of the Orders Militant had been assigned to the palace's security detail for reasons that had never been fully explained to her. Her battle sisters believed she was being honored for her exceptional service in the Ophidian Crusade, but Vorn suspected the truth was darker, that her assignment was punishment for asking too many questions about the fate of the pilgrims who journeyed to Terra but never returned to their homeworlds. The Sister Superior's duties included providing security for the ritual chambers, ensuring that the harvesting process proceeded without interruption. She had witnessed hundreds of these ceremonies, had watched thousands of faithful souls consumed by the apparatus of imperial necessity. Each ritual chipped away at her faith, but not in the way that might be expected. She did not doubt the Emperor's divinity or question his right to demand such sacrifice. Instead, she began to understand the true nature of divinity itself. God, she realized, was not mercy or love or protection. God was hunger, infinite, insatiable hunger that would consume everything in the universe if given the opportunity. The Emperor was not humanity's savior, but its ultimate predator, and the Imperium existed to feed him the endless stream of souls he required for his continued existence. This knowledge did not destroy her faith. It transformed it into something colder, harder, more terrible than devotion had ever been. The witnesses to these rituals formed an unofficial brotherhood of the damned, united by their shared knowledge of the truth that underpinned their civilization. They met in secret, in chambers far from the prying eyes of the Inquisition, to share their experiences and find what comfort they could in the knowledge that they were not alone in their burden. These gatherings were not conspiracies or cells of rebellion. They were support groups for those whose duty it was to maintain a lie that preserved humanity at the cost of their own souls. They spoke in whispers of the pilgrims they had watched consumed, of the moments of realization that haunted their dreams, of the terrible weight of knowledge that pressed down on them like the mass of a dying star. They shared techniques for maintaining their sanity, for compartmentalizing their emotions, for continuing to function as servants of an empire built on systematic deception and industrial-scale soul consumption. Some among them had attempted to find alternative solutions, to develop methods that might reduce the Emperor's hunger or find substitute forms of nourishment that did not require the consumption of human souls. These research projects were invariably shut down by higher authorities, their participants reassigned to other duties or simply disappearing without explanation. The system would not be reformed, because the system was not broken. It was working exactly as designed. The witnesses knew that their own fate was sealed. They had seen too much, knew too much, carried too heavy a burden of truth to ever be allowed to leave their positions. They would serve until they died, or until the weight of their knowledge finally broke their minds completely. There was no retirement, no honorable discharge, no peaceful end to their service. They were as trapped as the souls they watched being consumed, caught in the same web of necessity that powered the Imperium's survival. In their darkest moments, alone in their chambers, when the rituals had ended and the palace fell into its brief periods of relative quiet, The witnesses sometimes wondered if they were not also being consumed, slowly, subtly, their humanity being devoured piece by piece by the knowledge they carried. They felt themselves changing, becoming less than they had been, their capacity for hope and joy and simple human connection withering away like fruit left too long in toxic soil. They were the Emperor's most faithful servants and his most tormented victims. The guardians of a secret that would destroy everything they had sworn to protect if it were ever revealed. They lived with the knowledge that their God was not divine, but ravenous, that their faith was not devotion, but complicity, that their service was not noble, but necessary in the most terrible sense of the word. And still they continued to serve, because the alternative was the extinction of their species. They watched the rituals, recorded the data, maintained the machinery, and kept the secret that allowed humanity to survive another day in a universe that wanted nothing more than to devour it completely. In the end, they understood. They were all pilgrims on the same journey to the same destination. The only difference was that they knew where the path led, and that knowledge was both their curse and their burden. They were witnesses to the ultimate truth about their universe, that mercy was a luxury that no species could afford, that love was a weakness that predators exploited, and that the only God powerful enough to protect humanity was one that had forgotten what it meant to be human. The mathematics of damnation follow patterns that even the most advanced cogitators struggle to process. Equations written in suffering that balance cosmic forces too vast for human comprehension. Yet there are constants in these calculations, fundamental laws that govern the operation of the great machine of imperial consumption. Chief among these is the principle of inevitability. Once the system identifies a soul suitable for harvest, no force in the galaxy can alter its fate. The selection algorithms that determine which souls will feed the Emperor's hunger operate according to criteria that span thousands of variables, each weighted according to formulas developed over 10 millennia of experimentation. Psychic potential is measured not just in raw power, but in the specific frequencies of consciousness that produce the most nutritious spiritual energy. Genetic markers are analyzed for their correlation with particular flavors of despair. Biographical data is processed through predictive models that calculate exactly how much terror each individual will produce when they finally understand their fate. But beyond these mechanical considerations lies a deeper truth that the servants of the palace whisper about in their darkest moments. The Emperor's hunger is not random or indiscriminate. It is guided by an intelligence that has transcended human understanding, a consciousness that can perceive the quantum threads of possibility that connect every soul in the galaxy. The God Emperor does not simply consume whoever is brought before him. He orchestrates the entire process, guiding the selection of souls across the galaxy with the precision of a master chef choosing ingredients for a perfect meal. On the world of Meridian 7, a young woman named Sarah Valdris knelt in prayer before a shrine dedicated to the Emperor's mercy. Her faith burned with the pure intensity that marked her as an ideal candidate for harvest, but her selection was not based on the strength of her devotion alone. The algorithms had identified her as the nexus point of a web of connections that would amplify her eventual consumption beyond normal parameters. Her brother Marcus served as an officer in the Imperial Navy, commanding a vessel that patrolled the shipping lanes near the Cadian Gate. Her childhood friend, Tobias, had risen through the ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus to become a tech priest responsible for maintaining astropathic communication arrays. Her former lover, Matthias, now wore the power armor of a space marine, his enhanced physiology and psycho-conditioning making him one of the Emperor's most faithful warriors. These connections were not coincidental. They were the result of careful manipulation, spanning decades, subtle influences that had guided each individual's life choices to create the precise network of relationships that would make Sarah's eventual consumption a feast of interconnected anguish. When she was finally selected for transport to Terra, the psychic shock of her fate would ripple through this network, traumatizing all those who loved her and feeding additional energy into the great machinery of harvest. The black ships carried more than pilgrims. They transported webs of connection, carefully cultivated networks of relationship and attachment that would amplify the suffering of each individual soul. The journey to Terra served not just to prepare the selected for consumption, but to marinate them in the shared anguish of their fellow passengers, creating flavor combinations that had been perfected over millennia of experimentation. Sarah found herself sharing quarters with 9 other women, each selected for her unique contribution to what the Harvest Masters called a sympathy cluster, a group of souls whose individual traumas would resonate with and amplify each other during the final consumption. Their conversations during the journey created emotional bonds that would make their eventual separation and consumption far more devastating than if they had been processed individually. Sister Helena had been chosen from the ranks of the Adepta Sororitas, her warrior saint faith providing a stark contrast to the gentle devotion of the others. When her strength and certainty finally cracked under the weight of realization, the psychic energy released would have a sharp, bitter flavor that would enhance the sweeter notes of the other soul's despair. Magda the scribe had devoted her life to copying sacred texts, her fingers stained permanently with ink from illuminating manuscripts that praised the Emperor's wisdom. Her consumption would carry the unique agony of watching her life's work, revealed as propaganda designed to lead others to the same fate she now faced. Young Lydia, barely 16, had been selected not for her faith, but for her innocence, the perfect psychological virginity that would make her betrayal and consumption particularly savory. Her presence in the group served to traumatize the others, maternal instincts activated and then horrifically frustrated as they were forced to watch her suffer alongside them. The journey to Terra allowed these connections to deepen and mature, the women sharing stories of their homeworlds, their families, their dreams of serving the Emperor. They comforted each other through moments of doubt, strengthened each other's faith, formed bonds of sisterhood that would make their eventual separation a masterpiece of psychological torture. But the true scope of the inevitability only became apparent when the processing began. As Sarah was led away from her companions toward her designated consumption chamber, she caught a glimpse of a viewing gallery overlooking the ritual space.